excited to host Alice Leung, Vice President of Platform and Product Strategy at Brick and Mortar Ventures. I have listened to Alice's podcast in the past, and she has an amazing perspective on things in AEC tech. So I thought it would be great to have her on the show. Thanks a lot for your time to do this.
Of course, thanks for having me. And thank you for everyone logging in, especially on a Saturday.
I see. So Alice, if I were to ask, what are some three major highlights of your career? What would that be?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I would say probably the first major highlight is working on the UCSF Medical Center Mission Bay project with DPR, and particularly spending a lot of time with the kind of digital job site initiative. So as a quote unquote young person, at the company, growing up around computers and kind of, diving into the BIM and VDC side of things, I was tasked with trying to help implement the iPads on site and finding the best apps, and also doing a lot of training for superintendents, foremen. And what that ended up leading to was also trying to bring the 3D model out onto the construction sites. So I had the pleasure of working with a startup called BIM Anywhere, and this was back when there were maybe 4 or 5 apps for construction on the iPad. Built a great relationship with Peter Wu and Phil Lorenzo, got to work really closely with them. And it was really my first experience kind of working with a startup on the end user side. And that's definitely been one of the highlights, because through those relationships, I actually got connected with a lot of other people within similar positions working at large GCs that were also interested in applying or implementing new technologies. It kind of created this group of some of the early construction tech adopters, especially here in the Bay Area when it was so small back then. So I'd say that's probably one of my favorite highlights. The second one is relocating to Singapore to help start up DPR's Southeast Asia headquarters, and just being able to learn about how construction was done outside of the US. I learned about this thing called the quantity surveyor, which I think a lot of people here in the US have no idea what that is. But it was this role that really helped with change management, contracts, finance, some of the project management stuff. And it kind of led me to really appreciate some of the differences in the way that construction is done outside of the US. And if you look across many different countries, there's so many different things that affect technology adoption, such as some of the different skill sets, contracting methods, even cost of labor. That's a big one. In countries where it's predominantly foreign labor that comes in to do the construction, and the labor is inexpensive, we've actually seen almost this hesitancy to adopt a lot of BIM technologies, just because it didn't really translate to the value in the field. And we haven't really kind of thought through how do we utilize some of these technologies to actually empower the field. So I think we're kind of going through that right now. So that's number 2. And then I would say the third highlight is probably I'd say probably Formwork Labs. It's very different from what I was doing at brick and mortar. So I've been at brick and mortar for coming up on 3 years now. And from the experience talking to a lot of entrepreneurs and really digging into the construction tech space, we definitely saw that there was a big gap for early funding, and just being able to help design a program and help run a program that's really going to give back to the community. That's been a really huge highlight, and hopefully all goes well. We're still in the early stages, but yeah, we're working hard to make sure that it's very successful and it continues on for a really long time.
That's incredible. I'm curious to know, so from your experience of working in AC firm to you transition into the VC role, what's the major difference you see in the way of working, and how does a day in your life look like?
Yeah, so I think 2 different perspectives. One perspective that I'll start with is more on the evaluation of technology side. I think that was a big eye opener for me. So when I was at DPR working in operations, a lot of the times when I looked at technologies, it was always which was the best technology that could make my workflow the easiest? Like, what can I automate? How do I make, my job and everyone else's job easier? What is that value add? And it's very much more of a strategic angle, right? So it was very much like, okay, what is my ROI? How am I going to implement it? Is it easy to implement? And how do I convince upper management that this is something that is important enough to scale across a company? And that perspective of evaluating a startup is very different from evaluating a startup from a VC perspective, and particularly at an institutional venture capital firm. So brick and mortar ventures is, we invest for financial returns. So we're not a corporate venture group, and that's in itself even different, right? And corporate venture is probably right in the middle of, working at a company and then like pure financial investing. So on the pure financial investing side, the way that we evaluate technologies are frankly, which ones are going to have the biggest exits, the largest outcomes. And there's a lot of other criteria that we will evaluate on top of just, is this the best product? So coming like kind of, yeah, now in the VC side, just like thinking about it that way, I've actually struggled with that a lot because I've always thought about technology from the strategic perspective and have always thought about, implementation and ROIs and stuff like that. And on the venture side, you also have to evaluate founders. Are these founders able to tell a good story, inspire people to continue to be passionate about the problem? Can they raise capital? Are they really good at execution? Can they really take customer feedback and build that back into the product and lead a team that can kind of, take all of that feedback, build it back, and continue to grow and scale in a really fast manner? And not every construction tech startup fits within, that realm. So yeah, there's almost like three categories. So that's, I guess, one perspective from a day-to-day difference. And the other perspective is probably just more of what I do. So of course, when I was in operations, it was a lot of, talking to subcontractors, managing subcontractors, reviewing schedules, dealing with, a crazy inbox of lots and lots of RFI notifications and just a mess of information, and trying to put all of that into a process that can scale across a team. Versus now, I do get to do a lot of that, process related work where we're working on continuously bettering our deal flow process or our investment process and all that. But and I guess another similarity is I also have, a lot of emails that are unorganized that I have to go through. But a lot of what I do from a day-to-day basis is talking to startups, working with our portfolio companies, getting to talk to industry in a different way. So getting to talk to a lot of the head of innovation, or even, from that level down to project engineers who are boots on the ground on site, to kind of get their feedback on certain startups, or ask them about, what are pain points that are top of mind, and really trying to just dig into where else there are opportunities in construction tech. So I think, yeah, pretty different. But I think during my time in DPR, the company was just so supportive of innovation and going to conferences and meeting people that a lot of that actually feels the same for me. And I think actually, when I look at it from the venture side, a lot of venture investors don't attend industry conferences and they don't get to interact with the industry in the way that I've kind of been allowed to. So it's kind of been great to, take a lot of the same things that I've been doing at DPR into brick and mortar ventures. And a lot of that is the things that I like doing. And then now kind of just adding on a lot more, meetings and stuff like that, which is like fine. I think a lot of construction teams also, have a lot of meetings every day. So maybe it is a lot more similar than it looks like.
I see. And how did you train yourself for this role? And were there any resources or content you found useful?
Yeah, so zero training. Somehow, Darren took a chance on me without knowing anything about venture. And to be fair, I never thought I would go into venture. I always liked the startup side and the operation side. So really coming into venture was completely brand new for me. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the stage that we invest. So we invest in seed and series A, which is very different from some of the VCs that invest in series B, series C, and beyond. The later stage investors, they actually need a finance background, because when a company gets to that size, you're a lot more focused on financial metrics, growth and scale. A lot of these KPIs that are kind of, not really dependent on the industry, not dependent on what you're actually doing. It's more of just, do the numbers all make sense, and is this a good investment from that perspective? But when you look at the earlier stage stuff, like where we sit, it's really, the companies don't, they may not know exactly what they're doing yet. They're probably still finding product market fit. They still have a lot of questions about the industry. They're still looking to get connected with industry people. So given our team skill set, coming from industry, the value add for these startups at this stage is actually more on the network, how much you understand industry, understanding the nuances, more so than the financials. Of course, the financials and the KPIs are still very, very important. And thank goodness we have my teammate Austin, who does come from a finance background and can really like dig into all those numbers to get a sense of like, is this the right time for investment? But for the most part, yeah, it's really just working with the startups and your portfolio companies. So yeah, and I actually kind of forgot the question that you're asking. I rambled on.
No, like, is are there any like learning resources you found useful to prepare you for this role?
Yes, the one. So I read Secrets of Sand Hill Road, which is, I think it's a pretty good book for VC 101. But it was written, I think, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So it is a little bit outdated. And some of it has changed. In particular, just the more diversification of the types of venture funds out there. We're starting to see a lot more industry specific ones. And those seem to have, a little bit more of an edge on top of the generalist investors, just given the type of value add for these funds. But I would say there's a lot of resources out there. I think there's so many VC 101 guides, and there's a lot of documentation out there. But I think the biggest like way to, or the best way to learn it is to actually just have conversations. And when I first joined brick and mortar, I got to sit in on all of these meetings with my teammates, and I just learned from my teammates. And I think that's, more or less, I think in any industry, you kind of just learn by doing. And it's really hard to, read a book and fully understand the role. So I think, yeah, just learning by doing. And if there's anyone that is interested in VC and like, just, there's a lot of technical content out there on YouTube, like, what is a safe, what is a convertible note, what is, this type of funding mechanism, what are the different stages, what do you typically look for? So I think like YouTube, Google, it's all there. But I guess the one book that I've read is The Secrets of Sand Hill Road.
Got it. And I want to pick your brain on this. So we see like construction is a complex industry, and especially on the technological side, we haven't seen that much development compared to other industries. And comparing and seeing case studies of Katera, WeWork, like, what do you think like is 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 crucial for a startup to know if they're entering into the prop tech space, and your tips of finding success in this space?
Yeah, I think the main thing is understanding the longer sales cycles. And I know that investors don't want to hear this, right? Because they're like, oh, we want a company to grow from 0 to 100 million in revenue in 5 years, right? And that's crazy. And if you think about it, the only companies that have kind of been able to do that are the ones that are focused a lot more on consumer or B2B SaaS, where it, was kind of following some type of, new trend, or something new has happened, for some of the companies to grow that quickly. And it's very rare. Like, there are so many startups that get founded, but you only read about, the biggest successes and the biggest failures. There's a lot of the ones in between. And I think specifically for construction tech, just knowing that if, say, you're building a tool for commercial construction, a lot of those projects are, 2 to 5 years long, or even longer if it's, say, a hospital or a large infrastructure project. And when you take into calculation um, the runway that you have, the sales, and just knowing that a lot of the times your deals may not close as fast as you would think it is because of all of these other reasons. Um, I think that's one main thing, and that's why when I talk to a lot of founders, it's, make sure that the for your initial product, you have a really clear understanding of what that initial customer is, and depending on that customer, you got to dig into how do they decide how to buy technology, what technology to buy, what is that process for it being bought, and whether or not you need a pilot before people actually use it, right? So there's been some really great successes where, so you have like a freemium model, like FieldWire. FieldWire had this, I think it was like a 30-day trial or something like that, and because they were able to make it super easy onboarding and anyone can kind of use it, and then by the time it came around to buying a license, the cost of the license was less than the limit for credit cards. So a lot of people who were using the tool very likely were in a role where they had company credit cards, and they could make the decision that, hey, I can just charge this subscription on this credit card, and I don't need to write a PO, because if you need a PO, you gotta go get approval, you need an accountant, you know all this stuff, right? So it's just making it as frictionless as possible for someone to use the tech, fall in love with it, and then charge them for it. Um, but that all depends on what you're building, who your target customer is, and all that. So yeah, that's probably the main thing, is like, yeah, just understanding your customer well enough that you're planning for those sales cycles.
I see. And how is like the companies in your portfolio adapted to pandemic? Have they changed like their go to market or customer acquisition strategies?
I would say on the remote work side, there's definitely been big change, and I think that's just following any other company out there. But for the go to market and the customer side, I think for the most part they were fine, because a lot of our portfolio companies were at least a little diversified, in the sense that they were targeting already two different types of market verticals. So as an example, Cumulus, based out of Boston, they were targeting like oil and gas, and before the pandemic they actually got into data centers. So just given oil and gas kind of took a hit, but data center construction is booming, and it is crazy right now. So they were able to kind of, instead of focus sales on oil and gas, they focus sales on data centers. And now the data center market is probably like the faster growing market, because the sales cycles for data center jobs tend to be a lot faster than the sales cycles for oil and gas projects. So it's kind of already in their strategy to do diversification. And when the pandemic hit, it was like, okay, like, we're just going to refocus. And there's been a lot of people talking about the upcoming or current recession that the US is in, and how that's, been affecting everything. And I would say it's like the same thing where, with the recession, a lot of the times, at least from the contractor side, if there's an upcoming recession, they will also diversify the types of projects that they go after. So instead of focusing only on private, you may start focusing on government jobs. So like maybe you look at schools, maybe you look at, some of the other building types that are more similar to the scope of work, but not necessarily, a full-on transition to get into, road construction and whatnot. So I think for, construction tech in general, it's like we always push for the startups to have at least a couple of market verticals, so that if anything were to happen, like you kind of already have a playbook going, you kind of already know what's going on. And then, in the long run, like we want these startups to sell and be able to work across many different market verticals if it's not a vertically integrated solution. So yeah, I think pandemic it wasn't as, I mean, there were some instances where, term sheets and negotiations were, not that great, just given the uncertainty. But other than that, I would say for the most part, construction was considered an essential business, and there were a lot of projects that only got shut down for a couple weeks, and then everyone was back up and running.
I see. That's a great insight. And can you share the vision behind Formwork Labs? It's the YC of construction technology. I haven't seen that before, so can you do a deep dive?
Yeah, yeah. So I think Parker, I had a conversation with Parker at Suffolk Tech, and I think he actually may have coined the term YC of construction tech, but more for the boost program. But I don't know who actually came up with it first, but Darren had said, Formwork Labs, the YC of construction tech. But the vision for Formwork Labs is really to build a community around construction tech. And if you look at the two companies that have come together to put it on, it's Brick and Mortar Ventures, one of the, I think we're the most active investor in construction tech as it relates to number of companies invested in. Um, and we have, so at Brick and Mortar Ventures, we've also got a lot of the mature construction tech startups, part of our portfolio, or have already exited. So we kind of have that community of the more mature entrepreneurs as well as the reach with the startup ecosystem. And then we partnered with Built Worlds, which Built Worlds is, I would say, like the OG construction tech community, having been founded in 2014, and they actually coined the term Built World to kind of give a definition around AECO. So Built Worlds has been around for a really long time, since kind of the beginning of construction tech as well. And they've done a really great job at building together a community of a lot of large corporates who are very interested in new technology, and have since built out, on the corporate venture side, Built Worlds, Venture East and West. They've brought together a lot of the corporate VCs and even just investors in the construction tech space together to get excited about that opportunity. So we saw this really great opportunity to partner with Built Worlds, bring together both of our networks. And at a time where we're starting to see a lot of entrepreneurs interested in construction tech from outside of industry. So we were like, hey, there's a lot of really great entrepreneurs out there that are now starting to build stuff for our space. A lot of them ask the same questions around, oh, how should I, evaluate an opportunity? Are there customers that you can introduce us to? Can we get customer feedback? Like, can you, reach out to your network and help us make these introductions? So we kind of had, the startup, and through, Brick and Mortar Ventures working with a lot of these startups, we've also heard the same thing, right? So it's like you have the entrepreneurs who want to get connected with industry, and then you have industry that wants to work and mentor, advise, mentor, work with the startups, and also wanting to learn about all of these new startups. So we're kind of bringing all of that together into a community where it's a community of entrepreneurs, industry, plus investors, because we do have a demo day that's happening in September to, build excitement around investing in the space as well. So yeah, it's a community of all three groups of people in hopes that there's just a lot more collaboration between all of them. And at Brick and Mortar, we've already had this, long-standing relationship with a lot of folks in industry, but industry wants to learn from more like other types of investors, and a lot of investors also want access to industry. And the only way that we are going to grow and get better is if we have more people helping tackle these problems in construction. So we're very much like excited about helping build this industry, and like we've seen so many good startups out there, and we can't invest in all of them. We just need more capital coming into the space. So yeah, the vision is, just a community that continues to grow, and that, more experienced entrepreneurs then come and give back and mentor some of the early stage startups, and really kind of get this like cycle of, just experience reinvested back into the ecosystem. And we'll see, like, if at any point like this is too much, but as the way that I see it right now, there's still so much technology that we need.
That's incredible. So the ecosystem is this network of people who can help and benefit from each other. And the deadline for the program is on Monday, like
Yes.
2 days from this being live stream. Uh, so is is this the program like an accelerator where you have like mentorship? Can you like elaborate? So the demo day is on September. What's gonna happen between this time period?
Yeah, so the program is an accelerator program, and it is focused on not just construction. I guess it's focused on AECO tech in general. So it's very much in line with how we define construction tech, which is a little bit broader than just tools for the GC. And it is targeting startups that have not raised $1 million in total capital. So it's still very early stage. And the program is a 10-week program where the focus is actually on sharing experiences from experienced entrepreneurs, specifically in the construction tech space, right? This is all construction tech. What we've learned is that there are a lot of playbooks out there for other types of industries and other companies that don't work at all in construction. Like you can't just do, Facebook ads, you can't go out and reach out to everyone on LinkedIn because a majority of construction professionals are almost not reachable. Like they only pick up the phone call to talk to people, and like if you look at all of these other companies, like and the even the younger generation of people, no one wants to pick up the phone and call someone. But construction is very much an industry that's focused on relationships, phone calls, even text message, and a lot of the playbooks just don't work for this space. So the goal is that within the program, all of the entrepreneurs that go through it, they're going to start picking up on all of these different nuances of the construction industry and start formulating strategies that actually work for construction tech. And another big part of the program, and probably the bigger part of the program, is what we call customer conversations. So it's digging into, how do you have these conversations with potential pilot customers or early potential customers, like if you're still kind of in that fact finding stage. You will get the skill sets to be able to host kind of those, or like to have those conversations. But then we're also going to pair up a lot of these entrepreneurs. Actually, every entrepreneur that goes to the program, they're going to get paired up with, the goal is at least 10 different customers that they can either get feedback or potentially get feedback in the future, sell like pilot projects, or sign them up as customers in the future. So that's the main part, is just really bringing together industry with these entrepreneurs, and to make sure that the entrepreneurs get enough feedback so that when they're building their product, they're building it right, and it is relevant, and it is not kind of siloed to one way of thinking, and that the product will be scalable across many different users within the space. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest part. And then yeah, the program is on our website right now. We haven't published all of the mentors or the speakers yet. We're still finalizing that, but we're really, really close. We have a great group of mentors, 5 from the kind of investing side, 5 from the industry side, that are actually going to be accountability partners for all of these startups. So they'll have regular check-ins with these startups, and the goal is that there will be almost this tight-knit relationship between the founder, an investor, and an industry professional, where all 3 of them are going to be able to build relationships with each other, in hopes for ongoing like collaboration in the future for whatever. So yeah, the program is online. It's 10 weeks. We have a couple of fun in-person get-togethers. So the first one will be the customer kickoff. That's going to be at the Built World's Construction Tech Conference in Chicago. And then on August 24th, we'll have an in-person event where it's training, and then in the afternoon we'll have networking in San Francisco, where we will invite industry professionals, investors, and kind of people who are in that construction tech ecosystem to the SF event. And then we have the demo day that's going to happen early September in Chicago as well. So that'll be at the Built World's US Summit.
It's in Chicago. I'll like to attend.
You can attend.
I see. So, from the startup point of view, like there are prop tech startups with software focus, and there are prop tech with hardware focus. Let's say robotics. and some hardware focused startups might need some infrastructure and early investment. Like, uh, what kind of startups are you attracting?
Excellent question. I actually had a conversation with Alex and Daniel Hall at ETH Zurich about this because they're studying accelerator programs in the overall kind of construction ecosystem. And to be completely honest, this was something that we thought about, but wasn't fully thought through. So, given that this is our first program and it's kind of our MVP, we're still testing it out and working on it. Um, at the stage of the companies that we are investing in, it does tend to be a little bit more suited for software startups. And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that at this stage of company for hardware or robotics startups, they're actually looking more for robotics help or manufacturing assistance or lab space. And they may not even be at the stage where they can go demo their product or work with customers just yet. So like we're accepting applications from everyone, but really our biggest I would say like acceptance criteria is to make sure that we can add the most value to these startups that we accept into the program. So just given that, I think for this year it will be a little bit more skewed towards software, but we're trying our best to have like a diverse cohort if it makes sense. And I think for possibly next year or later on, we may have to do a separate hardware and robotics one, just because, like, if you talk to any of the construction robotics startups out there today, at that stage, they've needed very different things. And that's a fact finding mission that we will do after this first program, just to make sure that as we're continuing to run the program and as we're designing new programs, it is very suited for those types of startups at that stage.
Got it. And based on your experience working with proptech startups, what is the piece of advice you have for entrepreneurs who are in their seed stage and helping them finding product market fit?
Yeah, so I guess the main thing is just talking to a diverse set of customers, because I think when people look at when you just look at rankings, right? Say you look at, who's the ENR top 20. And if you only talk to the ENR top 20, that product is probably going to be skewed in a way that is not actually applicable to the 90% of construction. So at the very beginning, just making sure that, like, as you're doing your customer discovery and getting feedback on product, like, you're getting enough diversification of not just size of contractor, but also types of contractor, geographies of contractors, and making sure that the pain points are actually the same, or for the most part the same across all of those different stakeholders. And that, like, as you're building the product, it's actually applicable for a wide set, right? Because we've seen situations where there were startups that were built, or products that were built alongside a large construction company. And what ends up happening is they get pigeonholed into building this one product that may only work for that one company, but doesn't actually work for anyone else. So I would say that's probably a big thing. And I know it's hard to do, but just reaching out to people. For the most part, contractors are pretty nice, and they'll and if you buy them a beer and just ask them, hey, what are your pain points, or like, what are you struggling with today, or what are you struggling with this week, I think for the most part people will tell you and vent to you. And I think, like, having worked in industry, I did a lot of venting about inefficiencies with my colleagues. And every time I got to talk to a startup, I'm like, oh, good. Like, I can tell you about all my problems. You can help me build something to fix it. So I think for the most part, most contractors are open to having the conversation if you approach it the right way. And this is where, for a lot of the founders that don't know construction or are not from construction, I would recommend talking to someone who is from construction that can give you pointers on how to even say certain things. And it's mostly saying certain things so you don't sound like an idiot, because if you sound like an idiot to a contractor, they may just write you off right there. So learning about the construction lingo, understanding little things like what is cement versus concrete, right? So that was my first day as an intern at DPR. I was like, oh, look at that cement. And then the senior superintendent was like, that's concrete. You mix cement with water to get concrete or like water and aggregates and stuff like that. So it's just like little things like that where you take a little bit of time to understand the industry and the users, and that goes a long way for communicating with people so that you're speaking the same language.
I see. That's great. And for people who are working in non-AEC background, doing prop tech startups, uh, so this is one great advice of knowing the lingo. What are some major differences have you seen in the way they are approaching solving the problem versus AEC background folks developing prop tech startups?
Yeah, I think, and this is probably more of an extreme example, but if you look at Katera, right? They're always a fun one to pick on. But it's like, people who are overconfident about the construction industry, right? It's a huge industry, but if you don't take the time to actually understand why it is the way that it is, like chances are you're just going to fail because you're going to say like, and I've talked to so many entrepreneurs that are like, oh, I worked at Tesla and I know manufacturing and I'm going to disrupt construction to, make it manufacturing. And then it's like, okay, well, hold on. Let's break this down. Do you know what site connections are? Do you know what utilities are? Like, if you build this perfect box, do you know that there's a risk that when you plop it on site, that someone's not going to install the water exactly where it's supposed to be? So how do you build in, the flexibility for that, right? And we've just talked to so many entrepreneurs who are super overconfident because they're like, oh, I did this, home remodel and it was really shitty and I can solve it, but then they're trying to build something for commercial construction, which is like way different. So I would say, yeah, on the main difference is sometimes it's that overconfidence, and the founders from outside of industry that we actually really love are the ones who have actually taken the time to go out on a construction site, to talk to people, to get their boots dirty, to get some, dust on their pants, and they're actually appreciating what that construction environment looks and feels like. Um, and then bringing kind of an outside perspective, I think is a kind of really good, like mix of, what the founders do. And then on the other side, you have people from industry. And this is actually something that I'm prone to as well, is that if you become an expert in the construction industry and you know all of these pain points so well, you can also be pigeonholed into building something that only works for yourself or a very niche subset of people. And you may actually know way too much that it actually holds you back from rethinking it and building something in a way that is actually fundamentally changing the process and redoing the process rather than just digitizing the process. So I think we've seen, like, on the two ends of the spectrum, it's very different, but we've found a lot of entrepreneurs who are, kind of in the middle, and it's like perfect where, they may be from industry, but they are humble enough and they're open enough and have worked, in a couple of different environments to know that, hey, like this is actually applicable to, many different processes or whatnot. And then we've also spoken with a lot of the entrepreneurs who have really taken the time to appreciate construction. And it only helps them be better because as they're selling to construction, the contractors actually listen because they're like, hey, this person actually took the time to understand us and know why, we're different and why we think a certain way.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. What's your secret of keeping up to date with the trends and hunting good startups?
I don't know if there's a secret to that. um, it's talking to people, right? It's not really scalable. It's really hard to do, but it is just talking to people and bouncing ideas and just, being open to ideas too, right? Like before we started recording, we were chatting about metaverse and XR, and I was like, I've been so jaded by XR in construction because when I was playing around with it, this was back in like 2014, 2015, or the early days. and it just didn't work. Right. And it was just like, oh, VR is never going to work in construction. And maybe it works for design and engineering, but it's never going to work for construction. And I've just been so jaded following all of these startups and these stories trying to make it happen. And for me, I'm always challenging people to convince me separately or convince me differently. Right. Like, because I'm like, I know that I'm not the smartest VR person. And what's important is understanding from the startups what their customers are saying. And for the most part, the startups will share that. And it's like, okay, convince me why the timing is now and why the technology is now. And I do the same with metaverse and anything blockchain and all that. I'm like, convince me otherwise, because when I think about construction, it's like, why do we need blockchain for construction when it's purely just processes that we need? Or like, public ledgers, like, no, like no one's going to agree to that because construction is so anti-transparency, right? And it's like the timing is not now, but the timing could be in the future. And when the timing comes, I need to make sure that I have an open mind to accept that the timing is now. So I'm always kind of on my toes where I'm like, I have my, preconceived notions, I have my thoughts around what does work and what doesn't work, but really like training yourself to just make sure that you listen to the differing opinions, and then trying really hard to convince yourself that like maybe this other side is right. And I think that's the same for a lot of other great investors. And I actually learned that from my team. Like I have a great team that always challenged me on, my thoughts, especially coming from industry into investing. Like I had a lot of like thoughts and opinions that I've brought with me from working in industry. And it's really opened my eyes that like, hey, not every contractor is like DPR, from, not just the technology side, but the culture side, the process side. And they've always kind of, trained me and asked me questions. And now like having taken that learning, I'm now doing the same as I talk to other entrepreneurs.
I see. We have some great comments in the chat. So if anyone listening or watching have some questions, feel free to share. Uh, I'm curious to know, like, uh, what are some gotchas or like some potential $1 million mistakes a startup could make, and you wanna suggest?
Yeah, so this one is one that we've seen most frequently, and I think maybe some of the new startups are going to be a little different, but there are a lot of construction tech startups that have been built, say, just for the GC, and the data architecture actually doesn't allow you to have like almost, within an enterprise, multiple projects. And I think like when I was talking to some software engineers, it's like some like multi-tenant, multi-something. I don't know what the perfect term is, but how I describe it is that, for a software to be very successful, you kind of need to, have the GCs there, the subs there, maybe the architects and engineers. And if they're working on the same project, you shouldn't need to do double entry. And this has plagued so many construction tech startups out there because from the beginning, when you think about it, it's like, oh, I'm building a tool for the GC. But then without fully understanding that entire supply chain and that on some projects, there's like hundreds of contractors that all need to collaborate. There's a limitation in that software architecture. And then what ends up happening is, you're trying to run so fast at the beginning that you don't actually plan ahead. And then you can get to a point where there's too much tech debt. And then you're spending a lot of money trying to rebuild something from the ground up. And during that time, you also have to transition customers. You have to like, manage two softwares at once. And it's just, a huge, huge, like, it's just like, yeah, it's really distracting, not good for the startup. So when we have conversations with entrepreneurs, we always ask them this question, like, even if I don't know the, technology term, I'm always like, this is a scenario and can your software do this? And then if they can't, then it's like, okay, well, we may not invest until you've kind of at least have a path so that at some point in time, you can work with many different stakeholders within supply chain.
Got it. And ho- what's your vision of Uber for Contech or PropTech look like?
Yes. So well, if you take the Uber thing, we've actually invested in a company called Curry. that is kind of similar to Uber, but it's for delivering construction materials. And their whole thing is they're going to get into logistics. So kind of similar to Uber in that sense. And if you look at like other opportunities, and I think more broadly, if I think about like the crap, I forgot the gig economy. So if I think about gig economy, there's actually a couple of interesting startups out there that are trying to digitize the process for like certain scopes of work, and then building a marketplace around professionals to help with doing that service. So one example is a company called Design Everest. They're based out here in the Bay Area. They're kind of like a tech-enabled AE firm, and they've created this marketplace slash gig economy of architects and engineers who can now just work on all of these different types of residential projects. So it's mostly residential and remodel, so it's smaller scale now. And I think it's very interesting. And when I think about, and like a couple of years ago, I kind of tried to figure out what does Uber for construction look like. And when I think about it, construction is almost like a franchise. And is there a way for us to disassociate the assets, which are the people, so human capital? Can we disassociate the human capital from the brand and or the company that they work for, and then be able to build in the software layer that kind of does a lot of the administrative stuff or does the matching or whatever? I don't know. In the future, I'd love to see a world where people for projects, people get matched based on their past experiences, and as well as how do you bring together a high performing team and get matched based on people and not by company, and be able to very successfully run these projects. But of course, this is like very futurist. Like there's so many things that you need to do before you can get to that point. But if I could have my like perfect Uber for construction, where it's very much this like gig economy like thing, it's like, let's just break down humans, or like disconnect the humans from the companies.
Interesting. Like it's like an open database of people with their credibility listed, and you do matchmaking with people with their interests and skill set with the ideal client requirements. This
Exactly.
and so we see like sometimes innovation in startup being inspired from other disciplines or industry. For example, XR in contact or blockchain in contact, or have you seen any like gamification aspect in contact or proptech which is inspiring or like has a huge potential?
I have seen gamification, but it's more for safety.
Mm.
And in theory, it sounds great. And it hurts me to say this, but I've just seen so many companies talk about the importance of safety, but when it comes down to it, I don't see the practice actually matching what people are saying. Um, and I think we can definitely do better to incentivize people to partake in our safety culture. But and I don't know what the root cause is. Like, I don't know if it's like lack of training, or if it's lack of incentive, or maybe you don't have enough policing, or there's not enough oversight. But I've only seen gamification in safety, and I don't know if it's actually worked. I want it to work. I don't know if it's actually worked.
I see. We have a question from Harsh. From your experience, how do you evaluate risk versus return while investing in startups?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the bigger the risk, the bigger the return, is kind of how most investors look at it. And it's the same as, if you look at the construction supply chain, right? It's like the higher the risk, the higher the margin. So I don't know if there's like, a specific way to evaluate risk versus return. I think, at the early stage, we're really just looking at the return. And usually it's the crazy ideas that, allow for crazy returns, right? So we're always looking for those types of business models or the go-to-market strategies that are really going to change the process of how something is done. So instead of, going A to B to C to D, we're looking for things that are going from A to D. And then that then cuts out a lot of the middle people or the middle interactions. It cuts out certain workflows, makes things a lot more efficient. That doesn't work for every type of company out there. But for the most part, like on the software side, it's like, yeah, how do you find those companies that are really changing the process? And then on the hardware side, it's really how do we invest in something that's going to just have such an incredible ROI for mostly the field, right? So we made an investment in Rugged Robotics, which is the layout robot. And like for our investment in that, it wasn't, oh, let's just look at, the total addressable market for layout. What Rugged has built is actually a localization platform, and they've built a robot that knows where it is on a construction site from a control point without, the need of a ton of additional technology or equipment to do that. And because they've solved that piece, you start thinking about how do they become like, a video game console, or how do they become like a say like an iPhone, right? It's like, can they then have an app store where people build additional hardware arms, or like, new, like they can write new software to do certain things? And how do we open up that to allow for Rugged to be the chassis that a lot of other, automation on construction can happen? And that was our bet, right? It's like, it's actually very possible in the next couple of years that Rugged becomes this chassis. And then that's a huge deal for construction, because then you'll have one of these Rugged robots on every single job site. And as scopes of work change, you're just swapping out an arm or an attachment or whatever it is. And that'll change the industry in a very huge way. So it's always thinking about like, okay, where can the startup eventually go? And that's a lot of what I do, is like, that startup may just be tackling this one very small piece right now. But just given our understanding of data flows and process, and it's like, if you have this data that's part of this supply chain, that data is actually very useful for all of these other people or for all of these other processes. And if that startup is able to get all of that data, they can then become a platform for whatever it is, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities out there, but it really is like almost a case by case basis that it's like really hard to kind of have an answer.
Yeah, it's how you connect the dots, which makes it very
Yeah.
interesting. And if Alice, you were asked to teach a course in university, what would that be, and what are the core contents?
Is this about anything, or is this about construction?
I'll leave it flexible.
This isn't for college, but I've always wanted to be a physics teacher when I retire. But it's a high school, right? It's not college. I don't think I have any knowledge that's like enough for a university course. But I guess I could do like, I actually really love doing like a BIM 101. It's like my favorite thing, because I just, as much as I have this love hate relationship with BIM, where it's like it oftentimes gets, definitions get all messed up, and like people use it the wrong way, and people say BIM is this and BIM is that, when in reality it's like not just a 3D model. I've taught a couple of like BIM 101 courses in the past, and I've always enjoyed doing it, because when I teach it, it's always demystifying it, and then also talking about all the challenges, and not just painting this like really rosy picture of like, oh, we need BIM for everything and everything should be digital twin and like all this. It very much goes back to this like practical implementation of BIM, and understanding, if you have this budget and you have these resources, what can you do to get the most out of the BIM, and not just like, oh, everyone needs to do LOD 500 and all that. So yeah, I guess probably like a BIM 101.
Got it. And lastly, like I'm I'm curious, like what are some things you wish you would have done differently?
From a career perspective,
Yeah, career.
or um I don't know, that's always a hard one, because I feel like I've been very fortunate with my career path. Like I've, you know, my first job was this incredible project, and I got to learn so much about like what is almost the perfect team and setup and the perfect, it's almost a utopia when I look back at it now. And then from there, I went on to work at this hospital that was almost the complete opposite. So that was a great learning experience of understanding like, from the other end, what are the things that you need to pick up on and to watch out for in the future. And I don't regret the relocation. There's a lot of things that I don't regret. Um, I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe building more relationships with people in industry. But I feel like I've now in my current role, I've done a lot of that. You know what? Maybe it's spending more time in the field. That's probably a good one because I did. So I think it was right before I relocated to Singapore, or during one of the years that I was in Singapore, I participated in something called the PE boot camp at DPR, and it was the first one that they've ever hosted, and it was so much fun. And what they did was bring together a bunch of project engineers who didn't know anything about the field, and they taught us how to do layout. They taught us how to install like sheetrock. They taught us how to pour concrete. Like I got to like learn up, like, hold the hose and like, move it around and like try to fill in all the gaps. And then like one of my teammates had, the vibrator to make sure that, it's all get, like there's so much fun in that. And I've only done it once. And I feel like it was just such a great experience because I got to learn so much about like how people actually put stuff together. And when I talk to some of the other like engineers and managers, like they've all gone through this like rotational program where they got to learn surveying, they've got to learn like, all of this stuff that I think is very useful, at least for my role in understanding construction. So yeah, I guess that's probably my thing is like I should have spent more time in the field. I should have spent more time actually, doing hands-on stuff to know about what that process is and how hard it is, because I think it'll give me, and I already have a great appreciation for the people in the field, but it's just like it'll give me that concept of like how much harder it actually is than like just standing there watching and looking at the drawings and thinking that, oh, this detail is perfect and you can build it, but in reality it's like, oh, I actually can't, loop the rebar that way, or like there's just not enough space to do something.
Oh man, yeah, that's the more you understand the problems faced, like the more in the field it really helps. And like, what are the trends you're seeing in new prop tech startups? In which space are they mostly situated in?
So there's been a lot in the finance. So finance, financing, payments, so anything as it relates to financials. There's been a lot in that space most recently. We're starting to see a couple pop up in like, the intersection of insurance and construction. And I don't know. I would like to see more hardware and robotics. I think it's always been like, we're building real physical things, and we just need more of that, especially with the labor shortage and the lack of skilled labor on a lot of these projects. I want to see more there, but unfortunately, I think we've seen more on the like finance side. And I think, to be fair, it is a big market, but I think it's just, fintech has been so hot over the last couple of years, and insurtech as well, that I think people just automatically gravitate towards that. But there's still so many underserved opportunities.
And where is the Silicon Valley for prop tech?
So for prop tech, I would say it's probably more New York. But like our definition of prop tech versus construction tech is prop tech is very much focused on commercial real estate, and they may do, some construction tech investments that are related to more commercial real estate and single family residential. For us, we also do a lot more industrial. So we'll look at technologies for oil and gas, mining, civil, utility, fiber and all that type of stuff. So I would say for construction tech, I don't think there's a capital or like a Silicon Valley, or at least not anymore. I think it used to be the Bay Area when it was like the first generation of construction tech. But now we're just seeing all of these construction tech startups pop up all around the US, all around the world. And I think that just proves how global construction is, and how big of a problem it is for everyone in construction, that we can't claim, a main hub. And that's why we invest globally, because for construction tech, like, you may be better suited to do a construction tech startup, say in Houston, Texas, because there's a ton of construction projects going on right there, like right now. And if you want to get pilot customers and customer feedback, that's probably a better place to build it than here in Silicon Valley, where construction has actually slowed down a little bit. Like, I don't see as many tower cranes as I used to. So if you're, going around the world, look for where all the tower cranes are, and maybe that's a better place to start a construction tech startup.
Interesting. I have a rapid fire round to end the interview. So
Okay.
you'll have like 15 seconds to answer it. You gotta keep it very brief.
Okay.
All right. Which city is in your travel bucket list?
Oh, this is hard because South America, Johannesburg.
Okay. Any book or video which made a big impact in your life?
The Secrets of Sand Hill Road.
Your role model.
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say right now it's probably Nadia Hamade. She's with Bay City Mechanical, but she's definitely one of my role models right now.
Your favorite movie?
Interstellar.
Your favorite restaurant?
Suvla.
Uh, is there like a particular hobby you like the most?
Well, I like hiking, but I used to play a lot of basketball. I wish that I could say basketball as a hobby, but I think I'm just like too old now.
Okay, and the last is like you got to do thumbs up, thumbs down for the words I mentioned, like metaverse in AEC, blockchain in AEC, AI in AEC, generative design in AEC, and I forgot the last one. Like human computer interface in AEC.
Yes.
Okay, I think that's it. It was very inspiring and quite insightful interview. Thanks a lot for your time to do this.
Awesome. Thank you for hosting, and lots of great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of your day. Bye.